Welcome to the second Halloween video. Today we're going to make a science flask and fill it with these lovely candy eyes. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Let's delete these couple of things there in the default scene, add a UV sphere. I'm going to keep it at 32 segments and 16 rings. That's good enough for this one. And we'll tap into edit mode. Switch to edge selection. Tell a lie, switch to face mode. Press the C key for a brush selection. And with that selected, right click to get out of brush mode and then Ctrl+ on the numpad to increase your selection. And with that done, delete those faces. Let's do the same for the bottom part of the sphere. Maybe a bit, yeah, that's good. And let's delete those as well. Okay. So now we have a holy sphere. Let's select the bottom edge loop and press F to fill it. And a couple of insets. Now let's switch over to vertex mode. And I'm going to press Ctrl 7 on the numpad to get the bottom view. I'm going to select every other vertex and then the opposing one and press J to join. Just create some quads there. So let's make the neck of the flask next. To do that, I'm going to select these edge loops. Or edge loop, not edge loops. Press E to extrude, S to scale, and then we can move that up just like that. Let's do that again. E for extrude, S for scale. So there you go, very simple. Just extrude that out and scale that out just a touch. Let's right click and shade smooth and give it a name. So let's think about the scale of the flask, because at the moment it's 3.48 meters tall, which is pretty big for a flask. So I'm going to add a default cube as a measurement of scale. And the height of a typical flask, as a Florence flask in this case, is around 0.172 meters. So just type that in. The width doesn't really matter, as long as we get the height and the width approximately fitting our flask there. So I'm going to move that to the center. Switch over to wireframe mode so we can see the cube as well, and scale down our lovely little flask. I'm just going to go by the width of this for now. That should be good enough. That will do. Now we can delete the cube. Let's just join this area. And of course, as always, apply the scale. Like so, with Ctrl A. Okay, let's move that up just so it sits nicely on the virtual ground. Switch over to solid mode. Oh, snap indeed. We're going to add a solidify modifier and give that some thickness. 0.0002 of a meter. As always, with the solidify modifier, I like to click or select even thickness and normal's high quality, which I'll do in a second. But before I do that, I'm just going to edit the object a little bit more at the top there and add a little bit of an extrusion. A bit of a lip to the top there. So that's what we've got. So I'm going to select all of those because I think it's too thick. And S for scale, and I press Shift Z to exclude the Z axis. That would just make the neck thinner. Yeah, good point. We need to make sure that those candy eyes that I previously made in my other video actually do fit down the neck of the flask. Otherwise, it doesn't really make much sense. So I'm going to create a sphere, give it a size of 24 millimeters. So you can just type in 24 mm in the dimensions there. You can see we're pretty much spot on there. It's a bit of a gap, so with that done, we can delete the sphere and carry on. Let's turn back on. Actually, our solidify modifier is on. We've now added a subdivision modifier, and I've added 2 levels, which is great, but you can see there's a slight curve to the neck. So let's fix that. So I'm going to turn off these modifiers so we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to press Ctrl R, click and scroll my mouse wheel and add a couple of loop cuts to that area. S for scale and just Z, SZ, and that will just scale them up like that. That makes it so that the neck of the flask is actually nice and straight. It's going to add a couple of more loop cuts here. Well, in fact, just one there. Just to tighten up that lip at the top there. That's looking pretty good. And we'll do the same at the bottom as well. Let's turn off the subdiv so we can see what we're doing. So in edge mode, Alt click. I'm going to press Ctrl B to bevel. And give that a nice little bevel. Like so. I'm going to change the shape to 1. And there you go. It's looking lovely. Oh yeah, good point, lads. Always have a backup because we're going to be doing some other stuff, obviously, to the flask. So create a backup. I like to create a backup folder, duplicate the object with Shift D and just drag that in there and disable that collection. We've still got our modifiers, of course. So let's apply the solidify modifier now and turn it off. Sorry, turn off subdivision. And in edge mode, I'm going to select this edge and that edge there. And I'm going to press Control Delete to dissolve those edges. So the reason I'm doing that is because I want to select these 2 edge loops and just bevel them. Just a small bevel. This time 0.5 as a shape, just to round that off like that. Okay, I think that we're done with the modeling. So let's turn our attention to materials. Just changing the HDRI that's built into Blender. I'm obviously in the shading mode workspace now. So let's make a bit more space so we can see our nodes nice and clear. Just going to disconnect the principled BSDF and pull it down there. And I'm going to add another shader, which is going to be a glass shader. Shockingly enough, you would have guessed. There we go, we're done, we're finished. Oh, if only it was that simple. Right, the IOR value, I did some research on this. The closest I can find to this type of glass is 1.514. And that works quite well. Next, we're going to add a noise texture. And with the noise texture node selected, I press Ctrl T to create these 2 additional nodes. And I've switched the coordinates from object and plugged that into the vector. And of course, enable Node Wrangler for that functionality. And let's make some tweaks to the noise texture. I used a scale of 12, detail 8, roughness 0.75. And we plug the factor into the roughness of the glass BSDF node. You can see that's looking very frosted at the moment, so let's add a bit more control over the roughness values coming out of the noise texture. And to do that, we'll always tend to use the color ramp. I'm sure you've seen that many times. And yes, Control Shift and left mouse button click will just show you the output of the selected node, or the node that you click on, I should say, with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled. So anyway, color ramp, I've just crunched the black and white there, and that seems to work quite well. So I'm going to duplicate that node with Shift D, plug in the factor from the noise texture as well, and let's enter that hex value there, D9E396. It's like a greeny yellow color. And this one we're going to make white. So now we have this color ramp. Just a bit of a tweak there. And we can't see that yet, but if I Control Shift and click, we can see what that node looks like at the moment, which is very bright and garish. So let's click back on that, plug the color into the color, and now we have this lovely, filthy, grungy stuff on the glass material. So it looks pretty cool. An underused feature probably is when you select all of these nodes and press Ctrl J, that will create a lovely group. And I think I'm going to get organizer here because there's going to be 3 batches of frames here. So getting organized now will go a long way later. Right, back to the principled BSDF. I made the white color there all the way to white. Change the roughness to 0.3. Now I'm just adding another noise texture. Just going to drop that there. Let's have a look at these values. Let's go with 12 here as well. And again, 8 for the detail. And 0.75 again for the roughness. And that's what that looks like if we isolate that view with Control Shift and click, and then Control T, or you can manually add these 2 nodes there. So once more, change the coordinates from UV to object. Have a look around and see if that looks good. That looks pretty good for now. So let's move that over, give us a bit more space. And can you imagine we're going to add another color ramp and tweak those values coming out of the noise texture. Again, let's crunch up the blacks. Bring the whites in a touch as well. Not as aggressive as the one we did before. I probably will come back to this later on actually. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure you do watch the whole video. I do make some changes to the materials later on, in fact twice. But I'll put them in the video description as well. Okay, now we need to mix these 2 together. So we've got the glass shader and we also have the principled BSDF. So I'm going to select these groups of nodes and press Ctrl J to create a new frame and give that a label of label glass. And heads up, I will be changing the names of these later on because it doesn't really make much sense. Label glass isn't the right name for that really. So I'll come back and change that later anyway. I'll make those that text nice and big so we can see that. Cool. So yeah, we have 2 shader groups now. So we now need to mix them somehow, and to do that we're going to add a mixed shader and just drop that on the line there. That will connect it up. Let's bring that into the lower slot. And the glass node can be plugged into the top slot. Now we have this mix of the 2. All the way to the left is the top shader, the glass one there. All the way to the right is the bottom one, which is that one. Let's put it back to 0.5. So we need to mix this somehow. We're going to plug something into the factor. And to do that, I made this. It's my best work ever, look at that. It's an image, transparent PNG. I've called it Flask label. So I'm going to bring that into Blender and use that as my factor. So let's do texture, image texture. By the way, you can just drag and drop the image from your file explorer or find a window if you're on a Mac. So I'm going to load the image. Of course, we can't see it yet because it's just floating there in space. But if I Control Shift and click it, you can see that's what we get at the moment. And Control T to add some mapping. But in this case, we're going to keep UV. Okay, so we'll be looking at some UV unwrapping later on in the video. So it's good to know when you're doing labels. So I'm going to use the alpha actually as the factor. and plug that back into the output of the material. And we have a nice blend there of the two materials. However, clearly that's not what we want, so we need to figure out some UV mapping. Let's put that into a frame as well. And I'm just going to call that Mix Mask Label. There we go, you can see that nice and clearly now. Let's drop that up there. I like to keep my nodes tidy, so there you go, there is that. Right, UV mapping. Have you ever dabbled in that? How did you get on? Let's go to UV editing space at the top there. Let's make some space on the right. And here's our Flask in edit mode. And if you select all of the faces, this is what they look like currently, because that was a UV sphere and it did come unwrapped for us by default. If I click that little icon just there, so now I can select different faces individually, and it will keep all the other faces on the left side as well, so you can see where things are a bit easier. Basically, it's synchronized. Now, before we UV unwrap, there's something we need to do, and that is switch over to edge mode, and we need to create some seams. So I'm going to select some edge loops here. I think that one there and that one there. And the same for the bottom part. So that one's a good one, because that's where the peak of the crease is. And we're going to right click and select Mark Seam. And that should change the color of those edges in your viewport. Something like that, maybe red or something else. I'm also going to select this edge loop there, which goes all the way to top right to the bottom, and select the opposing one on the other side. So you can see just like that. Now we can right click and do Mark Seam again. And once you've done that, we can now switch to face mode. You can keep adding more seams if you like. This is not perfect, but it's good enough for the label. Anyway, switch to face mode, select all of them and press right click and then unwrap. Or you can press the U key. Now you can see on the left there, that's what we've got. That's the result of the unwrap. However, we don't need all of that to be over the label. So I'm going to select everything and scale it right down. Just place that move that with G in an empty space on your texture map. Because we don't want to see anything on the whole Flask other than where the label is going to be. However, I just realized that I actually put the seams on the wrong axes. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, select all the faces and rotate them by 90 degrees on the Z axis. So now I've got them facing left to right, the seams, and not front to back. Because I want to have the label in the front area, not the side. Hope that made sense, but I think you get the idea. Now, to create some more seams, this is the area. So I'm just counting there's six faces. This is the area that I want to have the label on. That area just there. So what I'm going to do is switch to face mode. Not face mode, edge mode. Select the boundary edges of that selection. So I can press shift and then control to click at the final one. So with that selected, you can right click and do Mark Seam. Now if we select these faces again, I'm going to press the C key again to get the brush and then right click to escape that. I'm going to press right click and unwrap. And that's what we've got. So that's a good approximation. Let's get in there. It's working. Not quite there yet. We've got some clipping going on and some distortion. So what I'd like to see is a nice grid, a nice flat grid of all of these faces. And Blender has a neat trick to do that. So what we need to do is zoom in here and grab two of these vertices. Select the face first. That one there's a good one. That's almost square. And select these two vertices, right click and do Align X. That's left and right. Same on the other ones there. Right click, Align X, and then do the same for the top ones, Align Y, which is up and down. And with that being perfectly square and straight now, we select the face, well, select all of the faces by pressing A, and then make sure you select that one, that face right there last, and then right click and do follow active quads. And there you go. All of the other faces will conform to that nice straight one that we created. Now it's just a matter of scaling up our UVs, like so. Now you can see on the Flask there, our texture is no longer cropped and it's not distorted at all. It's looking pretty good. I just say this may not be the best way to do this. I may want you to try to select some geometry and place it on top of the Flask and apply the label to that. But I didn't do that in this case. But feel free to try that if you want to. Right, with that said, I've added a plane. And obviously that's below the Flask. I'm going to add a quick texture for that as well, for the floor. Let's just make that quite dark. I mean, not very dark, but darkish. I'm going to add a area light. Remember, we're working to quite a small scale here, so your area light's going to be pretty big. So I'm just going to turn off the, or use scene lights in scene world. You can see the effect of our area light now. So I'm going to change the size to 0.5. You don't have to do this, by the way. I'm just doing this so I can better see what I'm doing with the glass shader and the materials. And I'm going to select the constraints and select track 2. And with the eyedropper, select the Flask. So now if we move our area light, it's always pointing at the Flask as an object constraint. I'm going to change the light shape to from a disk, or square, I should say, sorry, to a disk. Okay, revisit the shaders. I mentioned that earlier on. I wasn't quite happy with some of the bits and pieces that I did there. So one of the things I noticed is the label is too clean for the state of the Flask. So we need to make that a little bit more, what's the word, distressed, I guess. Let's go back to our label glass group. And let's tweak some of these values in the color ramp, because that's the one that's using the alpha for the label. So we need to have a bit more black for transparency. If I Control Shift and click, you can see there we're getting a little bit more distressed look to the label, which is pretty cool. I also changed the noise texture from 3D to 4D, and with that you can then move around the noise texture using the W value. So just play around with it and find the place that looks good for you and the label. Let's Control Shift and click again. I probably lost a bit too much of the label now. You can barely see the C and the B. So go back to the color ramp, make some minor tweaks. And there you go. That's much better. Right. Absolutely, yes. And I did go back and change the names of the groups. You can see there, that's now called Label Shader, Glass and Grunge. Grunge. And the top one is the image. So I've also added, you'll notice, a light path to the Glass and Grunge group and a transparent node, BSDF node. And that's because I wanted to have much more control over the shadow that the glass will be creating. I found that by default, it's too much of a shadow, too strong. I changed the specular values as well. And I also played around with the values of the noise texture. So feel free to pause the video as I navigate through those. And if you want to use the same values, feel free to do that. Cool, with that out of the way, let's get on to some physics. Now, on Blender Market, this is Physics Dropper, as you can see there. You can grab the full version for free, it says. There's a link there in the description. It's a great little add-on. And it's very generous that they're giving you that for free. It does say $4 there, but as I say, you can grab it there for free. So click on the link and download that. And once you've installed it, next step is for me to bring in the eyes, the candy eyes that I made in that video. So make sure you check that out if you haven't. So I'm going to File, Append, navigate to my, sorry about that, that's the oven in the background. Navigate to that Blender file, and I have those eyes in a collection called Candy Eye. So I've added that to my scene. There it is there, the collection called Candy Eye and Eyes. I don't know why I did that. And I have 3 eyes in there at the moment. And an object called Cylinder, which is actually a lollipop handle. So let's delete that. I won't be using that in this video. So now we're just left with the 3 eyes that I made before. I'm going to speed through this because it's quite tedious. What I'm doing here is simply placing each eye one at a time in the Flask, just floating in the air for now. So I'm using Alt-D to duplicate them, randomly duplicate those eyes, place them like that, and the add-on is right there in the side panel. And in Preferences, of course, when you installed it, you will find it there. It's called Physics Dropper. Just enable that, and you should see that in the sidebar. So once you've done that, what you can do is select all of the eyes, like that, and then click. But before I do that, change this option to Sphere. It makes it a lot more efficient. It doesn't have to calculate all the geometry. And I think that's meant to say World Settings, but it says Word there, ignore that. Just showing you what the options are. Play around with these if you want to. Get some cool effects. But I'm going to leave them exactly like that, apart from the shape. So with that done, select Rigid Body and click Drop. And ta-da! The eyes drop into the Flask, and that's great. Let me switch over to the timeline so you can see what's happened. You can see there, we can scrub through that. Now, I reset the physics and added more candy eyes because I needed to see a bit more of them in the Flask. And to do that, just hit the reset button to start over. Now, in the right-hand side, in the outliner, how this works is once you click drop, it creates a collider object. There's the one with the wireframe on it. It's that one right there. You can see there if I toggle it off. So the add-on will create that and use that as a collider. And if you apply the physics, which I haven't yet, you can reset it and just try again. And the collider object is all gone now. Just like that. Magic. So once again, I can select all of the eyes now. Make some more copies, in fact. Put one at the top there. Made a few more copies. Select them all. Click drop. Once you're happy with that, you can hit the apply button. Just like that. You can see the collider has now been hidden. But I'm going to delete it anyway. We don't need it. And there's our candy eyes. And there's our Flask. Right, the eyes are great, but some of them are facing the wrong way. So I'm going to select them individually, press R twice, and orbit them around to make them a little bit more interesting. I also went around and changed some of the materials as well to different colors. The ones that already came with the eyes anyway. Okay, let's turn our Flask back on. And that's looking really cool. However, I felt like the grunge that we have at the moment is covering too much of the eyes. I can't really see them as clearly as I'd like. So I'm going to go back to the glass and grunge shader group. And that's where our grunge is. So I'm going to make these tweaks. And I did that basically. Just cut forward there. Let's see what it looks like now. So there you go. Now I can see the eyes really nicely. There you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed that. And thanks for joining me. As always, like and subscribe if you like. And I'll let this play out. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.